Welcome back to the Go Slow to Go Fast Lifestyle Podcast. I'm Kendra Chapman, your host, and this is the space where we interview fascinating people about how they go slow in a fast-paced world. And joining me today is Cory Rosenke. He is an author, pastor, communicator, and someone who is deeply committed to exploring what he calls the 5 cravings of the soul. Through his work, he helps people reconnect to truth, clarity, and a deeper sense of purpose in the world that often feels noisy and uncertain. But Cory's story doesn't begin in a lecture hall or at a pulpit. It begins in the quiet, often harsh realities of childhood. From a canvas tent beside a remote lake in British Columbia to a log cabin in the Rocky Mountains, he grew up navigating poverty, isolation, and even seasons of homelessness. And yet, in those quiet, expansive landscapes, something powerful was forming. With a book in hand and a deep curiosity about life, meaning, and human behavior, Cory began a lifelong pursuit of understanding the why beneath the surface. That journey eventually led him to faith, to theology, and to the work he does today, helping others cut through confusion and reconnect with truth, identity, and the deeper longings within. This is a thoughtful, reflective conversation about curiosity, truth, and what it really means to understand ourselves on a deeper level. Let's get started. Maria, I just want to say thank you for agreeing to sit down with us today and welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm great, Kendra. Thanks for having me.
Yes. So the question I ask all my guests at the beginning is, how are you going slow to go fast?
Well, let me give you 2 answers from 2 different spheres. I would say the first one is something that I've learned over the last couple of years, which is every morning I wake up half an hour earlier than I need to, and I either go for a walk and clear my mind, or more often I do a devotional. And I find that taking the time before anything begins to just remember what my values are just makes the day go that much better. And I very much notice when I don't do that, the day goes much less efficiently. So in that sense, I take a half an hour that I don't have to take, but it makes me go faster. And the other one, I would say, is when I get a text from someone that frustrates me, I do not respond. I have a personal rule for at least 30 minutes. And I wait, and then I realize oftentimes that, again, that protects me from a whole lot of issues than if I just responded quickly.
I love that. You gave us, kind of a way that you start your day and then a practical strategy to deal with any kind of interruption that has worked for you. Because I think, and the more and more people I speak with and ask the same question every time, I do hear that common thread of when I don't do that, I notice a difference.
As humanity, we're adapting to a technological age where we think that we have the right to immediate connection with anyone we want. And there's this pressure because of that. And then we say things without thinking or respond without processing. And so I think taking the time to slow down and first realize I don't owe the whole world an immediate response. And not only when I actually give into that pressure, I end up generally making a mess of things.
Yeah, those are true words. I would say, coming from the school arena, that is so true because, you're human first and then you're serving people in a different way, but very much the same of you have a large group of people that look to you for leadership, look to you for how you're going to respond in different situations. Like I did in a school situation, you're in a different arena, but very similar leadership in a spiritual, religious aspect. So, leadership is something that people look to see how you're going to respond. And that's a great reminder is that, we don't have to give that immediate connection and response every time somebody tries to, connect.
Not only does it protect yourself, but it allows you to perhaps even be more helpful by giving a more thoughtful response, a more patient response than the immediate one. The immediate responses are kind of like fast food. Yeah, you get it quick, but generally it's not that good for you. It's better to wait and cook a proper meal.
Yes. And it might require some more prep, right? Might have to slow down a little bit more and remind ourselves, but it's going to be better for all of us in the long run, right?
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay. So for our Go Slow listeners and viewers out there, I want to take everybody back to where your story began as far as, that silence, that stillness that you've shared with me offline about when you were in the woods. And if you just want to kind of walk us back to that time in your life and kind of where you've gone since.
Yeah, so I was raised very poor. I remember when I was very young, my family lost our home, as I recall, to the bank, and my dad had no plan. And I remember driving to an intersection, and we were pulling an old tent trailer. I don't know if you remember those pop-up tent trailers, a really small old one from the 60s or 70s, and an old Thunderbird car. And I remember he pulled up to an intersection, he unhooked a trailer, and he said, "I'm going to whip a Yui." In Canada, I don't know if that's American language, but in Canada, that just means we're going to spin it 360. And whichever way we end up pointing, that's where we're going. And we lived in Alberta, Canada at the time, and the car pointed west, so we headed to British Columbia. And we were homeless as a family. My parents in the tent trailer, myself and my brother at times in a tent. And we ended up camping by a lake. And we were still homeless. And so I started going to school while we lived down by that lake. They put me in school for a while. I remember walking the trail about a mile and a half to the town and going to school. And that just to say, I was raised very poor and very remote for a lot of years. And then we ended up moving probably 5 years after that to a log cabin way up on the top of a mountainside in what's called the Okanagan area of British Columbia. And there was no power, no running water. Myself and my brother bathed in the local waterfall. We hauled water inside that we heated on the wood cook stove for my mom and my sister to have baths. And if we were lucky, we could bath in their dirty water, when they were done, but mostly we chose the waterfall. And I was raised remote, and I was raised without roots, I would say, to a certain degree. And so I sought connection, as strange as that sounds, in solitude, because solitude was the thing that was consistent. It was the thing that was familiar. And so I wandered those mountains with a walking stick, with my dog, with a backpack full of books and snacks. And I often say, I'd wander those mountain slopes, lean up against a tree, pull out a book, and just be swept away into a different world. And so I often think that I was raised by not just authors, but by characters. For a while I was reading Louis L'Amour Westerns, and I would say I was mentored by Tyrell Sackett and Jubal Sackett, different characters from his books, right? And then that led me to Plutarch, and I was mentored by Julius Caesar. And that led me ultimately to Plato and Aristotle, and I was introduced to philosophy, and all in solitude, all in that remote area where just somehow in a young boy's mind in the middle of nowhere, my mind was alive with questions and with wonder.
And I really appreciate you being so transparent and honest about your background and the way that you, had to transition into that lifestyle as a child, and thinking about how you took it on as an adventure, and a way to learn, from different books.
Well, and the irony is that my sister responded completely different. With her, she definitely stayed home. I'd say for a while she was in connection with friends, but our remoteness made that difficult. So she kind of, withdrew into herself and had a different way of coping. But for me, it was wander the mountains and see what foreign or ancient reader had to teach me.
And so, in those moments, have you thought about what your soul was, seeking when you were out in nature and you were reading those books? What were you looking for at that time? Do you remember?
I would say that I was seeking to be understood, and I was seeking to be seen. And, it's interesting because for me, from a very young age, I remember when we would get together after church at a different family's house, or just with family in general. I was that boy that didn't go out and play with the others. I was that boy that would sit against the kitchen wall and listen to the grown-ups talk and just be interested in their conversations, and always listening, always seeking to understand. And I think part of it comes from seeking to understand why my family lived so differently, because we lived completely different than other people. And I won't get into the motives of my parents, because that they know their motives and I don't. But I do know that I was wondering why we were different. And I knew that I was different too from the other kids. And I wanted to know why. I wanted to know what made me different. And I would say that's what really led me into the philosophers, and then even in toward Freud, and Freud led me to C.S. Lewis, and Lewis led me to Tozer, and this kind of progression of seeking to find an answer that actually made sense.
I mean, you were able to observe so much of your surrounding and then understand at such a high level, I'd say as a child, that you were living a life that was different than your peers, same age peers anyway. But it's just fascinating to hear that you remember thinking that way when you were little.
Yeah, I think I remember to a certain degree it was a desperate need to try to make sense. I mean, like, we often do that as people. We have to grasp onto something for an explanation because we need an answer. Sometimes we'll latch onto a terrible answer, that tells us who we are or who someone else is, and we'll cling to it for years, and it's the wrong answer, but we need something to cling to. And for myself, I need to understand why. And that just kept driving me. And I was that boy who, when I got an answer, I would ask why again, and then when they answered that question, I'd ask why again, and just drive people nuts by wanting to dig deeper and deeper and deeper. And to be honest, a lot of adults didn't have the patience with me. Aristotle couldn't get angry with me because he couldn't talk back.
Yeah. And, your love of learning led you on an adventure. You were out in the wilderness a lot of the time, while your family was living, in between homes. So where did you go next? What happened next in your journey?
Well, I left home when I was 14. And again, how or why my parents let me do that, I don't have an answer. They're good people, and but they let me do some things that perhaps other parents wouldn't. I left home and I went to work on a ranch. And so that's where I kind of fell in love with horses and cattle and that way of life. And that kind of led me to a cowboy lifestyle for a number of years. And then I was a horse trainer for a number of years. But again, those are solitary type environments that I was first seeking out. They were, again, environments that allowed me to, once again, sit on a mountain slope or in a meadow with a herd of cattle and watch them graze or doctor them alone, right? Or horse training. It was me alone, one-on-one, with an animal that I felt, to a certain degree, sometimes I felt like understood me or saw me more than anybody else did.
Yeah. People maybe listening to this right now would think that's so romantic that you were out in the wilderness and living this life that seems to be, ideal. But, there definitely would be challenges as well, because I think as humans, we need community. We need that connection. But in those moments, I think your connection was the nature and the animals, obviously.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. There's a romanticized version of that. And then there's that's real. There was, I would say I was a romantic at heart, and there was a real romantic version of that. But then there was the other side of it that took years to work through, of the scars and the damage, where, I mean, to this day, I would say that, abandonment would be something that I have to face, that struggle on a regular basis. Feeling seen and feeling heard is very important to me. And so I have to make sure that in any relationships that I'm in, that I'm not responding in an anxious way in that regard. I would say, even for me, one of the ways I coped as a child was to elevate poverty to something righteous, in the sense where I would, as a child, I'd be like, okay, all those other kids, they get to go to Disneyland, and they get to go out to McDonald's for lunch, and I'm going to sit here with my homemade sandwich and go nowhere. But that's because I'm strong, and it's only weak people that get to go see Mickey Mouse, right? These things that took many years to undo in my mind, that were very unhelpful for me ultimately in the long run.
I mean, I guess I kind of struggle with this a little bit, in the way that, a simple life could be so inspiring, but I understand what you're saying, because you're saying from a child's perspective, it wasn't your choice. And so you would have preferred to be able to do some of those experiences, of course, as a child, but obviously made you who you are now. So, besides understanding the things that you are working on as an adult, as we all do, right? Healing those inner child wounds. Where are you now in your process? If you feel like that there is a divine intervention with how this all worked out?
I think divine intervention is a good phrase there in the sense that, so even in my young wandering years, I always had these people that came into my life that were the right people at the right time, that mentored me or encouraged me or challenged me. The issue with isolation is oftentimes we can start, even intellectual isolation, what's the word I'm looking for? Isolation is you don't have someone there to challenge your thought, to challenge your perspective. And so you can end up thinking all sorts of, ridiculous things. And so isolationism is, sometimes it's beautiful because only when you're living that simple life in isolation does it seem that you can quiet your own mind, the world around you quiets, and you can become connected again to what really matters. And there's a wholeness there that is missing from the busyness. At the same time, when that is taken to the extreme or entered into incorrectly, so as an example, entered into to protect myself, right? Some people enter into isolation because they've found pain, in groups or amongst people. And I think both of them are a little bit true in my case, where I had that quiet moment to connect with what was real, but then I learned that lifestyle and ended up avoiding people because I knew the pain that connection could bring. And so I feel like as far as my progression now, as a minister, for me, it went from that young child wondering about life, thinking deep. And then like a lot of people, I hit a number of years there where it seemed like I had to be stupid for a while and do things that wise people had told me not to do, and learn the pain of it firsthand. Someone says, don't touch that stove, it's hot, but I had to touch it and burn myself. And yes. And so I feel like now as a minister, I've learned first off that as far as discovering who we are and what matters, not just in life in general, but on a day-by-day basis, that I can help point people back towards that solitude, and a solitude that is helpful and is healthy. And yet at the same time, I have definitely learned that I had to have people in my life that came in at the right time, and I had to choose to let them in, to encourage me, to challenge me, and to grow me. And I would say anybody who's walking this confusing earth right now with the anger and the division, whether or not they're a person of faith, needs to get away from the noise, get away from the unending barrage of influences that seek to pull us into their corner, and to just get quiet with ourselves, with our maker, with our loved ones, and reestablish once again what really matters.
You learned so many lessons when you were growing through those challenges. I wouldn't want to put any child through, being in isolation without choice. But I think it's a happy medium of understanding what we have and where we aspire to go.
But And in responding to your question too, so on one hand, like you mentioned, forced isolation could be bad, could be damaging, very much so. And at the same time, I think it's important that as people, we oftentimes, along with that quiet, comes questions that most of us prefer to leave unanswered. And in the quiet, you cannot leave them unanswered. They nag, they're right there. Those can be universal questions and they can be deeply personal questions. And so oftentimes we seek stimulus, we seek distraction, we seek noise because it drowns that voice. And so sometimes, like in my case, I didn't choose that loneliness, but at the same time, without it, and without, to a certain degree, being forced to face those questions, forced to face those answers, I definitely would not be who I am today. And I think that the version of me would be less.
That makes sense. Now, in your work as a minister, do you find ways to work both of those in pretty seamlessly and kind of share with your congregation how that can look?
Absolutely. I encourage everybody to, first off, as you mentioned, as a minister, and one of the lessons that I feel I personally learned throughout my years is that though I was alone, I wasn't alone. And that was a very important lesson for me to learn, that I was cared for, that I was created by a God who loved me, that I had purpose, that I had value. That lesson has become a core part of my ministry, and helping people remember that when you look around you, this is not all there is. That the more than a brain, more than a body, you are a soul. You are a soul of value. You are a soul of purpose. And we can pamper this body all we want. We can stimulate this mind all we want and still be empty if we are not feeding the core part of us that is truly the core of who we are. And so that experience, those lessons from my childhood, of course, led me through my mistakes into ministry and into my passion, which was really to help people understand who they are at a core level, that they do exist beyond biology. And I would say that was, a core lesson as myself being 10 and 11 years old, just being intuitively aware that I existed beyond this hand and I existed beyond this headache, that there was a desire for me, a craving for me, that there was nothing in this world could satisfy. Not solitude and not crowds, not technology, but diplomas. There was something else that needed to be satisfied.
Do you find that a lot of people you work with these days have a really hard time ignoring the noise and centering?
I do, because I really feel like by and large, we have forgotten who we are and what we are. We've come to this conclusion, which is really only a conclusion that's been reached in recent decades. And I believe it's an incorrect one and an unhelpful one, which we are learning. And that is that you are a brain and a body. And as long as you have the pleasures of the body that you want, as long as you stimulate the mind and educate the mind, that somehow you will find fulfillment there. And the world seems to kind of keep feeding us that narrative, and people have come to believe it. And so we seek satisfaction in things that were not designed to satisfy us. And I would say that is one of the things I try to communicate. And that's one of the reasons we see the struggles we see in the world today. We're looking for significance in things that fail. We're looking for security in things that can be taken away. We're looking for a sense of innocence or righteousness in illusion. We're attaching all of these things that are very important to human health. Every human needs to feel significant. Every human needs to feel secure, but we keep attaching them to biological things, which is why I often say that in the modern world today, think of it, we have more in regards to possessions and education and health and lifespan than any other generation in the history of mankind. Virtually every study shows we're more unhappy than ever. It's like we're sitting on an ever-increasing pile of possessions and achievements and awards and starving because our core need is not being met.
Yeah. We're missing the point of life, right?
Yeah. Yep.
The whole reason why we're here.
I can say I looked for it in solitude. And where I learned lessons from solitude, I still did not find the meaning of life in solitude. And then I looked for it in the crowd and in the chasing of passions, and it wasn't there. It didn't last because it just, it's like hunger, right? You eat one meal, but guess what? You're going to be hungry again before long. It doesn't satisfy. And so I feel like the whole world right now, we're like rats on a wheel, just running and chasing the same thing and never finding what truly satisfies.
So what would you say is filling your cup these days?
Yeah. I'd say what's satisfying my growth and process is I discovered a number of years ago what I call the 5 cravings of the soul. And that is the 5 cravings that ultimately drive each one of us, regardless of where we come from. And that is security, identity, independence, significance, and innocence. Basically, every human activity, every human desire, every human war or rage boils down to us either craving security, identity, independence, significance, innocence, or not craving them and looking for satisfaction in places that can't actually satisfy, or craving them and not knowing where to find them, or being let down. And so for me, as far as my satisfaction comes from knowing what I'm looking for. And I am oftentimes reminded of those 5 cravings. As an example, I've learned that I'm a significance guy and I'm an innocence guy. Which means I am attracted to people who make me feel significant and innocence, and I am repelled from people who in any way suggest that I'm guilty, right? Or make me feel small. That's true of all of us, but those are the 2 big ones that really stick out for me. And for me, I am hyper aware of those cravings now. And that really, I'm constantly reminded almost daily. Yeah. So as an example, here you are, Kendra. If I place my entire need for significance on you, I have placed a burden on you that you were not designed to bear. Right. And so for me, I am daily reminded, oh yes. And of course, from my worldview as a person of faith, I believe that I was made in the image of God and I was designed to find satisfaction for those cravings in Him. And so that has been a peace of mind, have brought me peace of mind in that when the world goes wrong, I can realize I can find my significance and who my Maker created me to be and His view of me. And that, to me, has been a game changer, just recognizing what I'm looking for.
Growing up Catholic and being an educator, I've always worked in service for others. With your 5 cravings, I'm wondering kind of what drives you. Would there be a hierarchy or depend on the person?
I think that there are certain, it depends on the person as to which ones are really at the surface in that particular moment. But ultimately, what the human race is looking for, I have concluded after all my years of study, of reading, of experience, what we're ultimately looking for is peace. We're looking for that. And I don't mean just pleasure. I mean peace, that everything is okay. We cannot have lasting peace unless all 5 of those cravings are satisfied simultaneously. And so I can feel safe and secure, right? I can have walls around my house. No one's going to harm me. But if I don't feel significant, I don't have peace, right? Or I can feel like I am significant. Everybody loves me. I can feel like I'm righteous, like I'm innocent and that I'm good. But if I don't know who I am, I don't have peace. And so I think it's really helpful to understand. So as an example, I'm sure most of your listeners can relate to, maybe they have issues with their spouse or issues with their sister or their coworker, whatever it is. It's helpful to know the issue is in those 5 things. And when you can aim for that, when you can say, you know what, I realize I've been making my sister feel small and she can't be around me when I make her feel small. Right. Or my spouse. One of the cravings is independence. I feel like, okay, my spouse is frustrated because I can see how I am smothering them. Right? And they have a need for some sort of autonomy. And it helps me understand and see, first off, how I can love them better, but also be able to communicate what I need and understand what I need. And then I can either address it with the person, or I can say, you know what? I've been placing an expectation on you that you weren't meant to bear or that you refuse to bear. So rather than ending this relationship for, let's say it's a boss or an employment of some kind, I can make sure I find satisfaction for that somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think the world, whether they're people of faith or not, they're looking to satisfy these 5 cravings. I personally believe the only place that they can be satisfied simultaneously and completely is in our Maker. My first book was called The Magnetic Heart of God, and I called it that because I believe these cravings were put inside us on purpose to keep us connected to the source we need to be connected to. But ultimately, the world is pursuing these cravings in other areas. And I often will tell people, the Bible tells a story about the prodigal son. And I often say, hey, listen, if you don't believe me, go look. If you think you can find significance somewhere else, or if you can find innocence somewhere else, to go try.
I'm thinking the 5 cravings is, in my mind as an educator, I'm thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You have to have the food and clothing. You have to feel safe before you can actually learn in school. And so teachers learn, that we've got to do that first. Then we can do other things with children because of trauma or whatever's going on. But, as far as the spirituality of it all, thinking about filling up your cup, what are you seeing a pattern with people? Like they start at one place and then they go to another, or it just all the entry points could be different depending on the person.
I'm glad you brought that. I've worked on this for a long time and invited a lot of colleagues to work on this with me. And what I've discovered is there are times when the cravings are very distinct. I know right now I am craving security. But there are other times when it's like they're blended together like a rainbow, and it's hard to know where one craving begins and the other craving ends. And there are other times when they clash with each other. So as an example, biologically, people would say that the strongest instinct we have is survival instinct. And yet, when it comes to security, you can break that down to 2 parts: physical security and relational security. We all need to know that we are loved and that our hearts are safe in the hands of those who hold them. And there are plenty of instances, both personally and throughout all of history, where people have willingly risked their physical safety in pursuit of relational security, right? Where you sacrifice one in pursuit of another. And so that's one where relational security would rise above physical security. But then there are other people that it would be like, hey, let's say that there's a spouse that's getting abused, right? They have, in that case, identity is one of the cravings. So they've become used to the identity of being this particular couple, and they have to be willing to shatter that identity in pursuit of true security. And so there are times when all the cravings are working together, and there are times when they are directly opposing each other.
So it's probably aligned with what the person individually values.
Yeah. And there are times when one specific craving is being starved. Right, where maybe I'm around someone who's praising me all the time and my cup of significance is very, very high, right? And yet maybe internally I feel like I'm a fraud. And so I'm really struggling with the questions of identity.
Yeah, it could
But
be.
the reason that at least I know what I'm looking for. And so I'm, which is very helpful because the world has a lot of opinions and a lot of ideas, and even psychology will throw a million things at you, all sorts of syndromes, all sorts of possibilities. There's all these different tests you can take out there to figure out if you're an avoidant attacher or all these different things. And it can be confusing because there's just so much. But when I can narrow it down and say, okay, here, the problem is in one of these 5 areas, it gives me some place to look.
So you have a system where listeners and viewers could figure out what area they're needing to kind of focus in on and then what to do to fill that, or
Well, I would
walk
encourage
us through that.
Yeah, I would encourage your listeners to, first off, I'm a big believer in what I call name therapy. I don't think I coined it. I think it's a common phrase, but name therapy being the first step toward healing or change or transformation is being able to name the issue. As long as it remains unnamed, I'm groping in the dark. And sometimes I get lucky and I can grab onto something. But if I can't name it, I can't heal it, or I can't grow it, or I can't kill it, or whatever it is that needs to happen. And so first off, I would encourage your listeners to sit down and just truly ask themselves, what part of me is starving right now? And just go through the checklist. You think about it. Like I said, security boils down to physical and relational security. So there's 2 kinds of security you want to look at. Sure, I feel safe. My bills are paid. My house is warm, but I don't feel secure in my relationship. I feel like something's broken, right? And so take note of that, right? So identity, at the core of everything is we need to know who we are, why we are, if we have value, if we have purpose, right? We're always craving identity, but for our kids, if you have a young listener, or if you're listeners who have children, during those formative years, or specifically, I'd say between like 13 and 18, kids are wondering who they are, and they're looking for a group to attach to. And it can be, and there's a whole world out there wanting to seduce people and say, hey, come to us. You can wear our label. I mean, that's how commercials work. That's how promotions work. It's right. Get our credit card and join our elite club. It's like, wow, that gives me identity and that gives me significance, right? Buy our car. I remember when I was young, the beer commercials, there was tons of beer commercials, and there were all these ladies in bikinis and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, the idea was to someone was like, oh, if I drink their beer, I become attractive to people, right? That gives me an identity. It gives me significance. So I would say to be able to sit down and go through these cravings, make your checklist and say, and maybe you'll find out all of them are red flags, or you'll find out, what, these ones here seem to be okay. And especially like it helps you understand other people, right? Why is there a disconnection between my spouse and I? I can tell you this, we enter a relationship expecting that something in that relationship will satisfy these 5 cravings. We're looking for security. We're looking for someone we want to identify with, but who doesn't completely impede our independence. Someone who makes us feel significant, someone who makes us feel innocent. And then that's the number one reason to enter into a relationship. We're looking for someone to reflect those back to us. And then when we don't find it, that's also the number one reason for leaving a relationship. It's like, what? I was there and I didn't feel secure. I didn't feel special. They constantly put me down and told me I was the one at fault, making me feel guilty. I mean, this can revolutionize I use this in relationship coaching all the time. It can revolutionize people's relationships when they realize, oh man, the husband can realize I have been making my wife feel small for a long time.
I was just going to ask you if you use it in any kind of marriage counseling.
Yeah, I do use it. And to be honest, it's been expanding to a lot of other counselors as well, who are finding, whoa, this is similar to the 5 love languages that kind of took the world by storm for a long while. It helps you put a name on something that makes you realize, oh, wow, not only do I need this, but I need to start giving this to someone else, or stop taking it from them. Because ultimately at the same time, every hero or superhero in all of our stories are someone who gives or preserves someone else's security or identity, independent, significant. And every villain is someone who takes it or hoards it or manipulates it. And sometimes we can find ourselves in our relationships that we are unintentionally that villain.
Yeah. Well, everybody loves, that story, of somebody who's fallen from grace, but then learns a lesson and, does better in the end. So,
yeah. Or we
Yeah.
love that story of someone who's fallen from grace, because here's the dark side of it. I don't need to feel completely innocent. I just need to believe I'm more innocent than you. Oftentimes when I'm doing relationship coaching, I've come to what I call the innocence wars, right? Where it literally boils down to, let's say the wife comes out and says, husband, you left your socks on the floor again, right? And it's like, it's an accusation. The accusation makes me feel guilty. And I can't have someone feel guilty. So my response isn't, I didn't leave those there. Maybe it is if I'm delusional enough, but it's, yeah, well, once again, you left the clothes in the washing machine and didn't put them in the dryer, and I needed my shirt. And so it becomes the innocence wars. Who's the most innocent? Who's the most righteous? I can handle it that I'm not completely innocent as long as I believe I'm more innocent than you.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how many relationships then become competitions, specifically in the areas of significance and innocence, over who has the most.
Right.
And then
Who's
I can't
right
feel
versus
safe with
who's
someone.
wrong.
I can't feel safe with someone who makes me feel small. So it takes it back to security. And I definitely don't want to identify with someone who makes me feel small. So it's an identity issue. And that's, again, where we have an issue where it's hard to know where one craving begins and the other ends, because they're all blended together.
Okay. So that was helpful. I think people are going to understand a little bit more how they work together. So this is all laid out in your book?
Yes, I have a book called The Magnetic Heart of God, Understanding the 5 Cravings of Your Soul. And it really is kind of like a fusion or a merging of theology, of philosophy, of psychology. And it really follows those parallel lines. And I've had a lot of people from different faith backgrounds, or even no faith background at all, who have told me, I don't necessarily agree with the religious, aspect of your conclusion, but as far as understanding who I am and what I'm looking for, wow, I see myself now. This is helpful. And so it really is. I wrote it to try to be as safe a book as I could for anybody from any worldview, just to help them understand who they are and what they're looking for.
And that's helpful to know. And so if anybody out there listening or watching is interested in learning more about the work that you do in the world, where can they find you?
They could find me either at my website, CoryRosenke.com. Obviously, you could find me there. Every couple of weeks, I write short stories with kind of a moral or ethical kind of solution or aspect to them. Or you could just look up my books anywhere books are sold, Cory Rosenke. I have 2 books. My most recent release looks at the soul from an eternal perspective. What is eternity and what does eternity look like? Where my first book is kind of like here and now. How can you find peace and happiness now? My second book extends that and says, okay, this is eternity and this is what eternity will look like. And this is ultimately what the soul is looking for.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So any final thoughts that you want to share before I let you go?
I would just go back to your opening statement of go slow to go fast, right? I would encourage your listeners to find a quiet place, a still place, and a still place where they can really ask themselves those deep questions about who and what they are. And I believe if they'll look at those 5 cravings, that they will be surprised at the complexity they can solve in that simplicity.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming on the show today. I think it's been a very organic conversation, and hopefully listeners and viewers will check out more about your work online. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Kendra. Thank you very much.
Well, that's it for today's episode of the Go Slow to Go Fast Lifestyle Podcast. Thank you for being here and for listening in. And if you've stayed until the end of this episode, that means that something resonated with you. And for me, what stood out in this conversation with Cory is the reminder that the search for meaning isn't something that we rush. It's something that we should sit with and reflect on. And it might keep coming back up over and over again until we finally learn how to accept what's coming up for us and integrate it into our life. Thank you for being here, for choosing to slow down in a world that moves so very fast. And remember that the light in me honors the light in you. And as you head into the rest of your week, let your light shine through. Go slow to go fast, and thanks for listening.